Doberman. Puppy was found in a backpack at a bus stop. The note left everyone in tears. Snow blanketed the road, and the wind screamed through the trees. On the bench by the bus stop across my house, a gray backpack lay on its side. The zipper cracked open by an inch. From that slit, a faint cloud of breath rose into the freezing air. I froze. Then it blinked. I ran. My gloves were stuck with ice as I pulled the zipper open. Inside was a tiny Doberman puppy, curled tight, drenched, trembling like a live wire, eyes half-glazed, breathing in short, hoarse gasps. In the side pocket was a rain-soaked note. "His name is Ranger. I'm sorry. Please be kind." No footprints, no person, only wind and snow. I scooped him up, pressed him to my chest inside my coat. "Hang on, Ranger." The door slammed open and the fireplace blazed red. I wrapped him in a wool blanket and wiped his body dry. His chest rose weakly, foam bubbled at his nose, and a raw cough rattled his ribs. His breathing grew heavier, the kind that screamed pneumonia. I grabbed the phone. "Dr. Miller, it's a puppy hypothermic wheezing hard." "Keep him warm," he said. "No heat shock. Bring him now." I lined a wicker basket with a heating pad, tucked Ranger in, and bolted for the truck. Headlights cut through the snow, the highway slick and black, the engine shuddering. "Don't sleep, kid," I whispered. "Don't." Ranger, rasped eyes rolling, head drooping. I floored the gas. The clinic door was already open. A nurse rolled the gurney, and Dr. Miller lifted Ranger onto the steel table. Heating blanket, oxygen. IV line he ordered. The thermometer read 93 degrees, SpO2 low. Chest crackles, thick acute pneumonia from cold exposure. Oxygen tube in, IV catheter set. The heating blanket sealed him in. The monitor blinked with shallow breaths. I stood behind the glass fists wrapped around the note. "His name is Ranger." Dr. Miller looked over. "Critical case. We'll keep him overnight. Antibiotics. Bronchodilator and active warming. Tonight's the fall point." I nodded. "Do everything you can." Ranger jerked when the needle touched his skin, coughed a spray of white fluid. The nurse wiped it clean. The heater hummed steadily. The room smelled of alcohol metal wet fur. Outside the window, snow thickened. 10 minutes, 20, 40. His breaths stretched a little longer. His temperature ticked up. Ranger's eyes fluttered open, then closed again. "He's responding," Dr. Miller murmured. "But he's not safe yet. We need 72 hours of close watch." I signed the intake form. Name, Frank Dalton. Location, Willow Creek, Montana. Diagnosis, hypothermia, acute pneumonia, respiratory distress. Plan oxygen IV, antibiotics, warmth, continuous monitoring. I pressed my palm to the glass. "Hear me, Ranger. Stay. Breathe steady. Follow the machine." Inside, the numbers blinked heart, even breath shallow, stabilizing. The nurse offered a chair. "You can wait in the lobby." I shook my head. "I'll stay here." She nodded, closed the door softly. Night fell fast. The snowstorm pressed down on the roof. A yellow light washed over the steel table where one fragile life hovered between breath and silence. I read the note again, the words cutting sharper this time. "I'm sorry. Please be kind." Dr. Miller came out. "We've stabilized his breathing for now, but the risk is high: pulmonary edema, hypoglycemia, progressing infection. Tonight will decide a lot." "I'm not leaving," I said. He placed a blanket over my shoulders. I stood there, eyes fixed on Ranger. Oxygen hissed softly. The IV dripped in a slow rhythm. The heater purred like a lullaby. Each time he coughed, I counted again. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in. Breathe out. Past midnight, the nurse adjusted the oxygen flow. The numbers steadied. Temperature 95.3 degrees. Dr. Miller lifted his eyes. There's hope. For the first time in hours, I exhaled. My hand loosened around the paper. Your name's Ranger, I whispered. You're safe now. No one's leaving you again. Outside, Willow Creek drowned in white. Inside, a puppy clung to every machine's pulse to find his way back to life. I never stepped away from that glass. Not for a minute. That night we stayed. 3 days later, the storm was gone. Snow thinned into a glittering sheet beneath the first sun of the season. Frank Dalton, 62. A retired watch repairman sat in the waiting area of Dr. Miller's clinic, holding a cup of coffee gone cold. From the adjoining room came the steady rhythm of a breathing machine. Each beep felt like the tick of a clock in my old shop, slow precise, but this time it was counting life. When I was young, I believed time could fix anything. A broken gear, a jammed spring, a silent watch, patience always brought it back to motion. But after Mary died, time turned into something I only counted, not something I trusted. The house went hollow. The kitchen echoed with the wind instead of laughter. I lived like a wound-down clock, still ticking but without a reason. Then, that morning, the snow gave back a life the world had abandoned. Dr. Miller stepped out, pulling off his gloves, voice low. Ranger made it through the worst, but he's weak. We'll keep him a few more days. I nodded. Can I cover the expenses? He studied me, then smiled faintly. He's lucky, Frank. Few make it 3 hours out there in a storm like that. I walked to the window. Ranger lay asleep inside the heated kennel floor line, trailing from his tiny paw breath, steady now. Every so often his body shivered, a leftover reflex from the cold. The doctor said it was normal, but to me, it felt like the faint tremor of a clock's hand moving again after years of stillness. By afternoon, they let me in for a few minutes. I moved quietly, afraid to startle him. Ranger opened his eyes, deep brown, clearer alive. He tried to lift his head ears, folding slightly. I whispered, "It's all right, buddy. You're safe. It's warm here." A small paw slipped out from under the blanket, trembling as it touched my finger. Not from fear, but as if to make sure someone was really still there. That evening, I drove home. The sunset spilled across Willow Creek's snowy roofs. I turned on the kitchen light, looked around the same empty room, the wooden table, the chair where Mary used to read the paper. On the wall hung the old pendulum clock. The second hand moved, but the house was quiet enough to hear my own breath. I sat down. The clock struck 3. 17 p.m., the same time Ranger usually opened his eyes behind the clinic glass. And in that moment I understood maybe I wouldn't be counting time alone anymore. On the 5th day, Dr. Miller cleared Ranger for release. He handed me a small basket, told me to keep him warm and dose the medicine every 8 hours. Ranger was thin neck bandaged and shoulders narrow. But his eyes, those eyes had changed. Clearer, brighter, a trace of trust. The drive home was short, yet it felt like crossing an entire winter. I drove slowly. Each bump made Ranger sigh and burrow deeper into the blanket. I steadied my hand over him. "Don't worry, kid. You've got me now." Back home, I set the basket by the fire and fed the flames. Light flickered across the wall, lined with broken clocks. Ranger curled tighter, breathing even. The silence felt different, quiet, but no longer empty. Night fell. Snow drifted again, softer this time. I sat, reading the paper, TV off. Ranger slept inside his nest, sometimes twitching claws brushing the wooden floor. The sound was small, but it filled the house completely. Before turning off the lamp, I glanced at the wall clock. The minute hand had stopped right at 3:17. For some reason, I laughed quietly. "Maybe time needs a rest too," I said, "just like you and me." I never called or wrote about whoever abandoned him. Maybe one day I'd find out. But that night, as the wind murmured through the window frame, I knew one truth for sure. From now on, I wouldn't just fix clocks. I'd mend the trust inside a pair of eyes that once lost it. Outside, Willow Creek slept beneath a clean white sheet of snow. Inside, the fire glowed steadily, and on the rug, Ranger, the smallest survivor, was learning to believe that someone stayed. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For the first time in 3 years, I felt time start to move again. The next morning, I woke to the faint sound of claws brushing across the wooden floor. The first light of Willow Creek slipped through the curtains, glinting on the rug where Ranger was struggling to stand. His legs trembled like dry twigs, his balance unsteady, yet his eyes were clear. His breathing wasn't steady, but the rasp was gone. I poured warm milk into a small bowl and set it beside the fire. Ranger watched me without moving. I stepped back a few paces, sat in the wooden chair, and pretended to read the morning paper like I always used to. In the stillness of the house, only the sound of paper rustling and the faint crackle of burning wood filled the air. 5 minutes. 10. Finally, Ranger took a step, then another. Head low. Each tap of his claws on the floor was sharp, deliberate, fragile. He stopped by the bowl, sniffed for a moment, then licked once, then twice, then again. His breath fogged faintly in the warm air, mixing with the smoke from the fire. I lowered the paper and smiled softly. Good boy. Ranger, startled, slightly ears twitching. His gaze met mine for a few seconds before lowering again. He wasn't afraid, just cautious. A creature once trapped inside a backpack doesn't trust easily. I understood that. I was the same after Mary died, locked up inside myself, sealed as tight as that zipper he was found behind. That afternoon, I cleared the corner by the window. I laid down a thick blanket, an old pillow, and a few rubber toys left from the days when Mary still kept a dog. Ranger sat watching, head tilted. I pointed. That's yours. He didn't move. But that night, when I pretended to sleep, I heard soft scratching, tiny claws dragging fabric. By morning, Ranger was lying there. Half his body on the blanket, half off. Half trust, half fear. But at least he'd chosen the spot near the window, right where I always sat in the mornings. 3 days passed. Ranger ate more steadily. Sometimes I caught him staring out the window longer than usual, toward the bus stop where I had found him. Every time a bus passed, his ears, pricked head, lifted eyes wide with hope, and then dropped again. No barking, no whining, just silence, as if listening for someone who wouldn't come. I began talking more, even though I knew he couldn't understand. When I adjusted the wall clock, I told him Mary loved this one. Now it only ticks out of habit. Ranger would lie under the table, eyes half closed, but each time I stopped talking, his ears twitched like he wanted me to go on. On Thursday night, something small happened. I dropped a screwdriver onto the floor metal, clattering sharply. Ranger jumped and bolted behind the chair. I moved closer but stopped a few steps away and spoke quietly. It's okay, buddy. Just a sound. Just a screwdriver. It took 10 minutes before his head peeked out. I didn't reach for him. I just stayed still, hand low to the floor. After a moment, his cold, wet nose touched the tip of my finger, hesitant, trembling, testing if kindness was real. I stayed still, didn't say a word. When he pulled back, I just smiled. From that second, I knew the line had shifted. He was no longer a creature of fear. He was beginning to choose trust. That night, when I turned off the lights, Ranger didn't return to his corner bed. He crept up beside my chair, curled into a ball. I listened to his tiny breaths syncing with the pendulum clock. 2 rhythms beating together. For the first time in 3 years, the house breathed like it was alive. Before sleep, I whispered into the dark, "Sleep, Ranger. Tomorrow, we start again." Like a clock's hand, even if it's broken, one gentle touch can make it move. Outside, the snow fell soft and slow. Inside, the fire burned steadily. Ranger stirred, curling tighter. My hand brushed his back warm, living real. A soul once sealed inside a backpack now slept at my feet at peace. 3 weeks after the rescue, Willow Creek's winter softened. Snow melted in patches, revealing the dark earth and faint tire lines from the old bus route down the main road. Inside the wooden house, Ranger was no longer the same fragile thing I'd found. His coat shone. His eyes were clear, his breathing steady, his temperature normal. He moved slowly but with purpose, the bandage around his neck finally gone. I kept Dr. Miller's schedule, religiously antibiotics in the morning, soft meals at noon, warmth at night. But the most important treatment wasn't in any prescription. It lived in how we spent our days together. Every morning I made coffee. Ranger sat in the kitchen doorway listening to the spoon stir the mug. Every afternoon I read the paper by the fireplace. He'd rest his head on my shoe, silent, breathing slow. No commands, no tricks, just presence. And somehow that was enough to fill every hollow space this house used to have. On the first day of February, I noticed something strange. At exactly 3:17 p.m., Ranger would stop whatever he was doing, walk to the window, and stare out. His gaze was fixed on the bus stop where I'd found him. I checked the clock, thought it was a coincidence, but the next day, at the same minute, he did it again. No sound, no movement, just waiting. By the third day, I put the paper down to watch. When the minute hand hit 3:17, Ranger rose and walked straight to the window like a compass pulled by memory. He stared for a long time as the wind outside struck the metal signs and made them clang like loose bells. Still, he didn't look away. I asked softly, "Who are you waiting for?" "Kid." Ranger turned toward me, his eyes deep, not sad, just quiet. Then he looked back to the road, inhaled once, and lay down again, his head still facing that white strip of street. From that day on, I left the wall clock frozen at 3:17. Never wound it. Never fixed it. I wanted to keep the time he'd chosen, the hour of his silent promise. A week later, Dr. Miller came by for a visit. He smiled when Ranger ran to the door. "He's doing great. Heart and lungs are strong. All he needs now is love." I nodded. That part I can handle. Ranger circled him once, then returned to my side as if afraid he'd be taken away. Miller laughed. "Looks like he's found his owner." I answered quietly, "No." We found each other. That evening, I cleared Mary's old table. On it lay the gray backpack I'd kept since that first night. I brushed away the last crusts of frozen snow and placed it beneath the glass top like a marker in time. Ranger walked by, sniffed around, then lay his head gently on it. No fear, no recoil, just peace. I whispered, "That's where you began, and maybe where I began again too." From then on, we lived by a new rhythm, not one set by clocks, but by small rituals of trust. Morning, we walked the melting road, Ranger leading me following. Noon, we shared bread. He never ate until I took the first bite. Afternoon. 17, the quiet ritual. Ranger at the window, me behind him, coffee in hand. No words, but both of us knew the weight of that moment. It was the hour of waiting, not the kind born of despair, but of faith that someone once promised to come back. One night, while Ranger slept, I unfolded the old note from the backpack. The ink still blurred. "His name is Ranger. I'm sorry. Please be kind." The handwriting was uneven, not an adult's. Maybe a child's. Blue school ink. Rushed, shaky. I touched my finger to the word sorry. My chest tightened. I thought of Ranger's eyes every afternoon at 3:17, not bitter, only patient. Maybe a child had written that note not out of cruelty but because they had no choice but to let go. I folded the paper and placed it inside Mary's old watch box. Then I looked over at Ranger curled by the fire. I whispered, if someone once loved you enough to beg for kindness, then I'll keep that promise for them. Outside, wind slid softly across the hills. Inside, the pendulum clock remained still at 3:17. Time no longer moved, but the heart did. A month after the storm, Willow Creek had changed color. The snow was gone, the sky a bright, endless blue. Ranger had grown stronger now, his stride sure, his ears standing tall again. Each morning he ran circles around the wooden porch tongue, out-tail high, as if he had never known the deadly cold that once nearly claimed him. But one habit remained at 3:17 every afternoon. He stood by the window and looked toward the old bus stop. I never stopped him. I just sat behind him, reading the paper, waiting for his breath to fall in rhythm with the wind whispering through the porch rails. One afternoon, while Ranger was resting, I took the gray backpack out from the glass cabinet. The old note still lay inside, its blue ink faded at the corners. I turned on the desk lamp, reached for my magnifying glass, and studied the handwriting closely. The letters were crooked, uneven, the ink smeared into faint trails, not an adult's hand. It was a child's. I sat still. The words fell into place in my head. His name is Ranger. I'm sorry. Please be kind. They weren't words of abandonment. They were a plea. A child hadn't wanted to let go but had been forced to. I picked up my old phone and scrolled through the dusty contact list. Mary Lou, the school secretary from the elementary school where I used to fix the bell clocks. I pressed call. Mary Lou, it's Frank Dalton. Her voice was the same as I remembered, raspy kind. Well, Lord have mercy, Frank. It's been ages. What's going on? I told her everything about Ranger, about the note, about the childish handwriting. She went quiet for a few seconds, then sighed. Frank, that sounds an awful lot like Eli Morgan's story. My breath caught. Eli. Yeah, he's 11. Lost his mom last year. Been living with an uncle who drinks too much. It got messy. After a bad fight, the police showed up, only the uncle was there. The boy and his dog were gone. They said the dog was a young Doberman just adopted from a rescue shelter. I looked toward the fireplace. Ranger was lying there, head lifted as if he understood. Mary Lou continued, last week they found Eli. He's in foster care under child services in Billings, but the first few nights all he kept asking was, did anyone find Ranger? I swallowed hard, my throat burning. How far is Billings? About 40 minutes by car. I can reach out if you want to connect. After the call, I sat still staring at Ranger. He walked over, rested his head on my knee, and exhaled softly. I whispered, You hear that, buddy? The one who wrote your note? He's still waiting. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote down the address in Billings. Ranger lay beside me, tail flicking gently at the sound of that name, as if he somehow knew. I stroked his head. We'll find that boy. Not to repay a debt, but to fulfill a promise. The next morning, I called Dr. Miller to ask if Ranger was healthy enough for a trip. He chuckled. Frank, that dog survived a blizzard. He's probably healthier than I am. By afternoon, I was loading the truck water blankets, a little dry food. Ranger jumped into the passenger seat, head resting on the steering wheel, waiting for me to start the engine. I laughed. Easy kid, not today. We've got one more call to make. That evening, the phone rang. Mary Lou again. Frank, they agreed. But you'll need to coordinate with Eli's caseworker. If all goes well, I'll let you know. I said quietly, Thank you, Mary Lou. Thank you for still believing in kindness. When I hung up, I looked at Ranger. He was asleep, curled against my leg, breathing slow and even. I turned toward the window. The wall clock still frozen at 3:17, the hour of waiting. But tonight the streetlight outside didn't look cold anymore. It looked warm, like a promise. I whispered, We're going to find the one who left that note, Ranger. And maybe when you two see each other again, I'll finally see something time once stole from me, the faith that every separation happens for a reason. Outside, the Montana wind drifted softly across the hills. Inside, Ranger stirred in his sleep, letting out a faint whine, as if calling a name, Eli. Saturday morning, the sun rose behind the Montana hills and a thin mist clung to the truck's windows. I started the old pickup and Ranger leapt onto the passenger seat, resting his head on the steering wheel as if he already knew this day mattered. "Let's go, buddy. It's time." The road from Willow Creek to Billings took 40 minutes, but I drove slowly. No radio, no talk. Only the wind's hum and the sound of tires biting the soft, melting snow. Ranger gazed out the window tail, flicking eyes bright, a mix of eagerness and fear. When the sign for Billings Community Home for Children appeared, my heart pounded. I stopped the truck and looked at Ranger, the boy who wrote your note, Eli, ready to see him again. He couldn't understand the words, but his eyes said everything. He lifted a paw onto my hand once, then turned toward the gate. Inside the office, Mary Lou was waiting with a social worker. Her eyes widened when she saw Ranger. Good Lord, he's alive. Eli's going to be over the moon. I nodded, throat tightening. I just want the boy to know he made it. They led us into the common room. Sunlight poured through the windows, washing the walls covered in children's drawings. One of them made me stop cold, a wax crayon sketch of a boy and a dog scrawled beneath in shaky letters, me and Ranger. Forever. The door behind us creaked open. A thin boy with messy brown hair and a worn hoodie stepped inside. Eli. Ranger lifted his head, every muscle going taut, ears high. No bark. No sound, only that quick trembling breath before the world stood still. Ranger, Eli's voice cracked, small and breaking. The dog bolted. The leash slipped from my hand. Claws clicked against the floor fast, hard, then stopped in a soft thud as he reached the boy. Eli dropped to his knees. Ranger leapt into him, pressing his face against the boy's neck, whimpering deep and low. The sound of stifled sobs filled the room. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to leave you. I just wanted you to live." No one spoke. The social worker wiped her eyes. Mary Lou turned away. I stepped back, clutching the crumpled note in my palm. Ranger licked Eli's face tail, thrashing wildly, then curled against the boy's chest as if stitching back together what two small souls had lost. Eli looked up at me, eyes red and glistening. "You're the man who saved him." I shook my head. "No, son. You saved him when you wrote that note. I just finished what you started." He broke down, holding Ranger tighter. I thought nobody would ever find him. I knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You believed in kindness when the world around you fell apart. That's why he's still here." The visit time was nearly over. The social worker spoke softly. "Eli's still here for now, but he'll be placed in long-term foster care soon. If you'd like to visit, you're welcome to register." I looked at Ranger. He looked back, warm brown eyes that seemed to understand. I knew then what the right thing was. It was to let him stay. I knelt again and stroked his head. "You kept your promise, kid. Now it's my turn to learn how to let go." Ranger whimpered, nudged my hand with his nose, then turned toward Eli. He had made his choice beside the boy he'd waited for every day at 3:17. I stood, voice rough. "Take good care of him, son." Eli nodded, clutching Ranger close. "I promise." As I stepped out the door, I turned one last time. Ranger lay in Eli's lap, sunlight blazing across his black and tan coat like ribbons of fire. The sight stopped me cold. No blizzards. No machines breathing for him. Only two lives breathing together again. I whispered, barely loud enough for myself. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about bringing someone home to where they belong. Outside, snow melted slowly along the Billings Road. I drove back to Willow Creek, the passenger seat empty but my heart full. Behind me at home, the old pendulum clock would still be frozen at 3:17, the hour Ranger no longer waited. Because the one he waited for had come home. A week after leaving Billings, I was back in Willow Creek. The sky was crystal clear. The snow had melted into patches, revealing fresh blades of green grass. The small street near the old bus stop now showed only faint lines of worn paint. Yet every time I passed it, my heart trembled slightly, like hearing again the faint breath that once rose from a gray backpack. The wooden house was quiet, but no longer empty. Ranger wasn't here anymore, yet his warmth lingered in every corner. The old blanket nest, the water bowl by the fire, and the pendulum clock still frozen at 3:17. I never fixed it. I wanted it to stay there forever, the moment when love came full circle. In the mornings, I still made my coffee, but instead of silence, I spoke to Ranger, though I knew he couldn't hear me. You know what kid Eli wrote me yesterday? Said Ranger's training to be a therapy dog. I smiled. In the envelope was a photo Ranger lying beside a hospital bed, his head resting on the arm of a boy undergoing chemotherapy. Beneath the picture, Eli had written in neat, round letters, "He's doing it again, helping someone breathe easier." Just 6 words. But I had to stop reading halfway through because my eyes blurred. That afternoon, I walked to the old bus stop, the place where I had first found him. The snow was gone, the wooden bench's paint was peeling, and the sign leaned crooked. I set down a new gray backpack, the same kind as before, filled with a few toys and a handwritten note for the next one who's left behind. Please be kind. I sat still. The wind slipped through my coat, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I thought about how a creature without words could teach people the meaning of compassion. Ranger had never needed promises, never demanded anything in return. He simply stayed quiet, steady, until he made everyone around him believe that goodness was still worth believing in. That evening, I lit the lamp. The house glowed in honey-colored light. I took out an old photograph, the one I'd taken the day I left Billings. Eli was holding Ranger snow falling around them like silver dust. I framed it and placed it on the table beside the clock with its still hands. Beneath it, I carved a small inscription. 17. The moment Faith came home. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window. I heard a truck stop in front of the porch. Stepping outside, I saw Eli. He was taller now, cheeks flushed pink, holding a familiar leash. Behind him, Ranger. Bigger, stronger, his black and tan coat gleaming. Eli smiled. I wanted you to see him again. Ranger bolted forward, tail whipping, pressing his head into my hands, whimpering softly, just like 3 years ago. I knelt down, ran my hand along his back, my heart trembling. Welcome home, Ranger. We sat together on the porch steps. Eli told me he's helping so many patients. There was a kid who hadn't spoken for 2 months, and now he smiles when Ranger walks in. I looked at the dog lying between us, eyes half closed in the sun, breathing evenly. He has his own language, I said softly. He speaks with presence, with breath. Eli nodded. I think he still remembers you. I smiled. He doesn't need to. It's enough that we met. When they left, I stood at the door, watching the truck roll down the road. The sun stretched long across the pavement. Ranger turned, once looked back as if to say goodbye. This time I didn't feel sad. I knew time had started moving again, no longer frozen at 3:17. Inside, I hung a small wooden sign beside the window, carved with simple words, "In memory of Ranger, for those who stayed." Then I placed my hand on the pendulum clock and wound it once. Tick. The first sound after months, strong, steady, warm. I sat down, closed my eyes, and let the ticking blend with the wind outside. Somewhere out there, maybe Ranger was walking down a white hospital hallway, bringing warmth to someone learning to trust again. And I knew, even without words, love always finds its way home. If you've ever stopped your car in the middle of the road just to save a small life, if you've ever reached out to a trembling creature even when no one was watching, then you've done the one thing this world needs most. You've chosen kindness. Ranger never spoke. He never wrote a thank you. But every breath he took, every time he turned back to look, was his deepest way of saying thank you to those who stayed when others walked away. Because sometimes what saves us isn't a miracle. It's a single, trusting glance in a blizzard, a hand reaching out when it seems too late. One moment enough to change 2 lives. If this story touched you, help us share it. Share it so that someone out there, someone losing faith, feeling left behind, knows that it only takes one person to stop. And one life can be saved, and sometimes we are the ones being saved. Leave A or A if you still believe kindness exists. And hit subscribe. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to help build a world where every breath is heard, every soul is seen, and love chooses to stay.